There were some alarming new vulnerabilities found in connected car alarms.
So Mike, you got an interesting story here about some smart car alarms that are exposing some vehicles to some hijacking?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, actually, the article called it ironic, right? You have these aftermarket car alarm systems from two vendors, Pandora and Viper. Viper is also called Clifford in the United Kingdom. Both were found to have vulnerabilities that allowed for remote exploit. Particularly in their smartphone applications that they use to control the alarm systems. But some researchers were able to identify that there were some vulnerabilities in both apps that use this insecure direct object references, or IDORs, in both of the applications' different APIs. And these IDORs are a pretty common mistake. I mean, they're in the OWASP top 10 for broken access control, so they're a pretty common mistake that developers tend to make.
I think there's something that developers have to understand is that as long as it's sitting out there on the network, people are going to interact with it, no matter what it is, in ways that you have not intended, and you need to protect against that sort of abuse.
So these researchers were able to tamper with some of the parameters and actually update the email addresses associated with the accounts without any authentication. So able to send password resets to their email addresses and then gain access to the accounts. A bunch of interesting details here. One was you can actually register an account in both systems without actually purchasing anything. So you can create test and demo accounts and ultimately gain access to some real credentials. And once you had access, you could do kind of a whole slew of things. You could get geolocation. You could get personal information about the owner. You could disable, obviously, the alarm. You could unlock the doors. And even in some cases, they claimed you could kill the engine while it was running. So just a lot of bad things if you were able to gain access.
The problem, though, is that these companies have stated that their application has been downloaded over 3 million times. That's a huge number of people who are exposed to this or were exposed to this.
They did, however, report to both vendors this issue. They actually gave them 7 days, a kind of a quick turnaround to fix, because they kind of assumed that maybe this was already being exploited out in the wild. And they said that both actually responded pretty quickly and fixed the vulnerabilities within a few days. And they confirmed that these fixes were in place.
That's certainly interesting. So it sounded like the article reported it as a vulnerability in the app, but it sounded to me more like it was a vulnerability in the servers that support the app, because the calls you can make directly to the servers without even involving the app, right? You can create yourself an account from the web and then go ahead and send those commands as long as you know what the endpoints are. You can just do the same sort of stuff an app would do, but the app would probably ask you to sign in and prove you actually might, own that car, maybe?
I think that's important to do.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it sounds pretty familiar. I mean, I've seen this sort of thing happen with a lot of mobile apps where really it's the back end that's not doing its job properly and sort of relying on people to interact with it in the way that the app specifies and not in the way that those protocols allow you to. This is probably all over HTTP, HTTPS, I'm guessing?
Yeah, the article didn't go into much actual details. There is a link to the actual researchers. They provide a little more, but I believe it was just doing post calls, right? They probably reverse engineer, like you mentioned, the app to see ultimately where the endpoints are. But yeah, just over REST calls.
Yeah. Wow. Well, it's not the first time we've seen vulnerabilities come from automotive industry. Obviously, there's been plenty in the past. To actually speak to somewhat of a larger problem, there's a report actually from the Panama Institute that shows 30% of companies don't even have their own cybersecurity team.
So there's a percent of car companies?
Of automotive, from companies from the automotive industry don't have their own cybersecurity team.
Oh boy.
So, maybe they're a little bit behind the times in understanding the importance of cybersecurity. Maybe it's the situation where, desperation will breed action and something like this being actually exploited in the wild. Hopefully that doesn't happen. But if it did, we'd hope that it would prompt other companies to say, I don't want that to happen. Oh, so let's take security a little more seriously.
I don't want to tell people not to buy smart devices that make their lives more convenient, but they should at least be aware of the fact that anything that you add to a system may not necessarily make it more secure, even if its stated function is security.